Ethan stood at the edge of his new 15-acre property, the crisp autumn air wrapping around him like a soft blanket. The Texas countryside stretched out in all directions, its rolling hills dotted with occasional oak trees, their leaves just beginning to show the first hints of fall color. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh earth and wildflowers. This was it, his escape from the crowded streets and the relentless hum of city life. He had been an engineer in Houston for 15 years, a job that had once promised excitement but had turned into a stifling routine. The concrete jungle of the city had grown oppressive. And so, at 42, with a modest inheritance from his uncle and a longing for something simpler, he had decided to leave it all behind. This land, with its wide-open spaces and quiet beauty, was his chance to build something new. Something real. He set up camp in a small trailer as he prepared for the construction of his dream ranch. A garden here, a small chicken coop there, and, in time, maybe a couple of horses. His plans were modest. All he wanted was a sustainable life, something away from the rat race, where mornings were filled with the chirp of birds instead of the shrill sound of traffic. The thought of it made him smile, even as the first few days on the land felt strangely surreal. The warning from his real estate agent, Lisa, echoed in his mind as he unpacked a few boxes. "Just one thing you should know," she had said, "this property isn't part of the Oakwood Estates' HOA, even though it borders it. Sometimes they try to claim jurisdiction, but your deed clearly states you're independent." He had brushed it off at the time, too eager to get away from the noise and stress of the city to worry about a small community association. But now, as he surveyed the land, a seed of unease began to grow. Lisa had seemed hesitant when she showed him the property, almost as though she knew something he didn't. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, even as he cleared small patches of land for a vegetable garden, preparing the earth with quiet satisfaction. He loved the peace, the way the wind rustled through the tall grass, the way the sun bathed everything in golden light as it set behind the hills. It was everything he had dreamed of. But as the days passed, Ethan couldn't ignore the gnawing sensation at the back of his mind. He'd come here to escape, but what if the very thing that had drawn him to this place, the land itself, became a battleground? What if his dream of peace was about to be shattered by some unseen force? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. He glanced up to see a sleek white Mercedes SUV rolling down the dirt road toward his camp. The vehicle came to a stop a few feet away, and two figures stepped out. One was a tall woman, impeccably dressed in what looked like designer casual wear. Her perfectly styled blonde hair glinted in the sunlight, and her tan suggested a life spent in places far warmer than this quiet corner of Texas. She had the air of someone who was used to having things her way. The man who accompanied her was tall and stiff, his military posture clear even from a distance. His crew-cut hair and stern expression made him look like someone who followed orders without question. The woman smiled brightly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," she called out, her voice smooth but with an undertone of authority. "You must be the new owner. I'm Victoria Harrington, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, and this is Robert Winters, our vice president. We thought we'd come by and welcome you to the neighborhood." Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and extended one to shake, introducing himself. "Ethan Reynolds. Nice to meet you both." Victoria barely touched his hand before pulling it away, her eyes scanning the property with barely veiled disapproval. "We just wanted to drop by and give you a copy of our HOA guidelines," she said, handing him a thick binder. "All properties in this area need to maintain certain standards to preserve community values and property prices." Ethan flipped through the binder, scanning the rules about everything from lawn height to mailbox colors. He looked back at her, trying to keep his tone friendly but firm. "I appreciate the welcome, but my property isn't part of your HOA. My real estate agent and the deed were clear on that." Victoria's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something colder. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding. All properties in this area are under our jurisdiction. It's been that way for years." Ethan kept his tone steady. "The legal documents say otherwise. I specifically bought this property because it's independent, but I'm planning to keep it nice. No junk cars or eyesores, I promise." Robert cleared his throat. "Perhaps you misunderstood your paperwork. The HOA boundary extends to include this parcel. Ethan stood his ground. I'm a former engineer. Reading technical documents is what I do. My land is not part of your HOA, according to every legal document I signed. Victoria's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something more rigid and calculating beneath. Well, we should sort this out quickly, she said, her tone now slightly sharper. Having a farm operation so close to our community could significantly impact property values. I'm sure you understand our concern. Ethan's eyes narrowed. It's a small ranch, not a factory farm. And again, since I'm not part of your HOA, your property value concerns, while understandable, aren't really my legal obligation. Victoria's smile returned, but it was tight, rehearsed. We'll have our attorney review the situation. In the meantime, welcome to the area. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. With that, she turned and walked back to the SUV, Robert following closely behind, though he gave Ethan an apologetic glance as they drove off. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the binder still in his hand. Something didn't sit right. Why had they come here, and why had Victoria seemed so insistent on reminding him about the road running through his property? He could feel the weight of her gaze lingering, and though he wasn't sure what this meant yet, one thing was clear: his new life wasn't going to be as peaceful as he had hoped. Ethan stood at the edge of his property, the vast Texas landscape stretching out before him in all its autumn glory. The serenity that had so deeply appealed to him just a few days ago now felt a little different, as if something he couldn't quite define was beginning to shift in the air. He glanced at the trailer where he had set up camp, surrounded by the open land he had dreamed of. The sound of birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, these were the things that had made him leave behind the hustle of Houston. But now, he couldn't shake the feeling that the peace he had sought was already being tested. He hadn't expected much conflict in his new life. He had thought his biggest challenge would be adjusting to a slower pace, getting used to doing things on his own land. But then, Victoria Harrington and her right-hand man, Robert Winters, had shown up, and things had already started to feel more complicated. As he worked on clearing a patch of land for his garden, his thoughts drifted back to Lisa's warning, the real estate agent who had sold him the land. Just one thing you should know, she had said, almost apologetically. This property isn't part of Oakwood Estates' HOA, but sometimes they try to claim jurisdiction. Ethan had been too excited about the idea of living free, away from the pressures of the city, to let her words fully sink in. But now, with Victoria's and Robert's arrival, those words echoed in his mind again. Ethan's peaceful morning was interrupted by the same white Mercedes SUV, its polished shine gleaming in the early sunlight. As the vehicle came to a stop, Ethan sighed and braced himself for what he knew would be another unwelcome visit. Victoria stepped out first, her polished, affluent appearance in stark contrast to the simple, quiet land around them. Robert followed closely behind her, his military posture as rigid as ever. Victoria's smile was as practiced as the first time they'd met, but this time it seemed colder, more calculated. "Good morning again, Ethan," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "We've come by to check on a few things regarding the property." Ethan stood tall, his arms crossed as he watched them approach. "I thought we already cleared this up," he said. "My property isn't part of the HOA, and my deed clearly states that." Victoria's eyes flicked over to Robert for a brief moment before she returned her gaze to Ethan. "Yes, well," she said, her voice tightening, "sometimes there are misunderstandings with the paperwork. It's our responsibility to make sure everything in the area is in line with our community standards." Ethan shook his head, trying to keep his cool. "I'm sorry, but as I've said, my land is not part of your HOA. The deed is clear." Robert stepped forward, his stance firm. "It's a little more complicated than that," he said, his voice stern. "The HOA has jurisdiction over the surrounding area, and we've always considered this road to be part of our domain." He gestured toward the dirt road that ran along the edge of Ethan's property. "We just want to make sure there are no issues down the line." Ethan felt his patience begin to wear thin. "There's no issue," he said, "unless you try to make one. The road is mine, and it's only for utility access. There's nothing in my paperwork that says I have to adhere to any of your HOA guidelines." Victoria's smile tightened further, and for the first time, Ethan saw the mask slip, revealing something colder beneath. "Well, perhaps you don't realize," she said, "but having a farm operation right next to Oakwood Estates could significantly impact our property values. We can't have unsightly operations affecting the neighborhood." Ethan's jaw clenched. "It's a small ranch, not a factory farm. It's not going to affect anyone's property values." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She took a step back, her gaze lingering on his simple setup, a modest trailer and a few tools scattered about. "But in the meantime, I'll have my attorney review the situation. This is just a friendly reminder that you're not as independent as you think." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Victoria cut him off. "Consider this a final warning," she added with a cold smile. "We expect everything to be in order moving forward." She turned on her heel, and Robert followed, not sparing Ethan another glance. As they climbed back into their luxurious SUV, the sound of the engine humming to life felt like a stark contrast to the calm silence of the land around Ethan. He stood there for a moment, watching them leave, his mind racing. Was this really going to be the life he had imagined? Or had he unknowingly stepped into a battle that would threaten everything he had worked for? Ethan shook his head, trying to push the thoughts aside. This land was his, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him, not even the HOA. Ethan sat on the small porch of his trailer, a cup of coffee cradled between his hands as the morning sun cast long shadows over his land. The quiet of the Texas countryside felt like a balm after the noise and chaos of his old life in Houston. The scent of earth and freshly cut grass hung in the air, and the occasional chirp of a bird was the only sound that broke the stillness. This was the life he had imagined, peaceful, simple, and free. But now, as he gazed out at the expanse of land he was working so hard to cultivate, he couldn't shake the feeling that his newfound peace was under threat. Victoria Harrington and the HOA had already made it clear that they weren't going to let him live quietly without interference. He had known it wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever was, but he hadn't expected the HOA to make things so difficult, so quickly. The second letter from the HOA had arrived the day before, and this time, the tone was harsher. It accused him of violating community standards and threatened fines for his agricultural activities. Ethan couldn't believe it. His land was his own, and he had every right to raise a few chickens and grow vegetables. But the HOA had no intention of respecting that. Instead, they seemed intent on controlling every aspect of his life, even his modest little farm. He sighed, shaking his head. They were testing him, and he wasn't about to back down. If they wanted to play hardball, then he would play by their rules, but with a twist. He'd follow every guideline they imposed, but he would do so in a way that highlighted just how unreasonable they were being. He would comply, but only to expose their overreach. This would be malicious compliance. Just then, a knock on the door broke his thoughts. He stood up, stretching his stiff muscles, and opened it to find Olivia standing there, a warm smile on her face. She was one of the few people in Oakwood Estates who seemed genuinely friendly, and over the past few weeks, they'd started to get to know each other. "Morning, Ethan," Olivia greeted him. "How's it going with the HOA?" Ethan chuckled dryly, stepping aside to let her in. "Going great," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "They've just sent me another letter threatening fines for my farm activities. I'm starting to wonder if they'll send me a bill for breathing next." Olivia shook her head, her expression sympathetic. "Yeah, that's about right," she said, sitting down at the small table in his trailer. "They'll keep coming at you like that. It's how they operate. They push, and if you push back, they push harder. But you've got to stand your ground. Don't let them walk all over you." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie with her. "I don't plan to," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not going to let them push me off my land. But I've been thinking, I'll give them what they want. I'll follow all their rules, exactly as they say, and document everything. Let them see just how ridiculous they're being." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Malicious compliance, huh? I like it. Just make sure you keep records of everything, every letter, every phone call, every interaction. The more you have in writing, the stronger your case will be when you go after them. Ethan smiled, the plan starting to take shape in his mind. That's exactly what I'm doing. I've already set up cameras around the property to record anything they try. I'll even keep a log of the times they come by, the things they say. If they want to play dirty, I'll give them the tools to dig their own hole. Olivia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms thoughtfully. Just be careful, she cautioned. Victoria's not someone who backs down easily. She's used to getting her way, and she's got a lot of power behind her. But if you stay calm and firm, you've got a chance. Ethan's resolve solidified. I'm not backing down. This is my property, and I've got the law on my side. They can't make me go along with their nonsense. Over the next few days, Ethan settled into a routine. His mornings were spent working on his garden, clearing more land for future crops. He was careful to document every task, noting the time and date as he worked, just in case the HOA tried to accuse him of something later. He would be meticulous, nothing would go unnoticed. His afternoons were spent organizing the cameras he had installed around the property, ensuring they were positioned to capture every movement near the boundary lines, especially around the dirt road that the HOA claimed was a community access road. He also kept a log of the letters and phone calls he received, keeping detailed records of everything. If the HOA wanted to take this to court, they'd have plenty of material to work with. But then, the inevitable happened. A third letter arrived. This one was more aggressive than the others, threatening fines for not complying with their regulations regarding the use of the land. Ethan felt his blood pressure rise as he read through the letter, but he didn't let his anger show. Instead, he calmly set it down on the table and dialed the number for his lawyer, Daniel Kelly, an old college buddy who had already agreed to help him with the situation. Daniel, Ethan said when his friend answered, I need your help. They're threatening fines again. They're insisting that I'm violating their rules, even though I'm not part of their HOA. What can I do? Daniel's voice was calm on the other end of the line. It sounds like they're trying to intimidate you, Ethan. Don't worry. We'll get this sorted out. Keep all your records, letters, emails, phone calls. And don't make any rash moves. Let me review the details, and we'll figure out the best way to respond. Ethan nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate it. As he hung up the phone, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. He wasn't alone in this. He had the law on his side, and he had a strategy. The HOA had underestimated him, and he was ready to show them just how far they had pushed him. The sun had just begun to rise over the Texas hills, casting a golden light across Ethan's property. He stood at the edge of his land, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as he surveyed the quiet, expansive landscape. The mornings were his favorite time, the air still crisp from the night, the world slowly coming to life. The chirping of birds and the rustling of the trees in the breeze were a stark contrast to the growing tension that had begun to hang over him. For the past few weeks, Ethan had been dealing with the HOA's interference, but today felt different. The unease he had felt when Victoria and Robert first showed up had been replaced with something heavier, something more ominous. The HOA was escalating their tactics, and he could feel it in his bones. He had woken up to another letter from the HOA. His stomach had sunk as soon as he saw the familiar letterhead. It was a second warning, this time threatening legal action if he didn't comply with their regulations. He could practically hear Victoria's smug tone as he read through the letter, her words dripping with authority. Failure to comply, it read, will result in legal action and possible fines. This is your final notice. Ethan crumpled the paper in his hand and tossed it onto the porch, his jaw tightening. He had known it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. Olivia's words echoed in his mind, they won't stop. They'll keep pushing until you push back. The more you comply, the more they'll try to take. He stood still for a moment, breathing in the morning air, trying to calm the mounting pressure in his chest. He knew this wasn't just about his farm anymore. This was about standing his ground. They wanted to force him off his land, to make him submit to their rules, but Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw Daniel's name flashing on the screen. He answered quickly. "Ethan," Daniel's voice came through, calm and steady. "I got your records. We've got a case here, but we need to be strategic. They're going to escalate. You need to stay ahead of them." Ethan nodded, even though Daniel couldn't see it. "I know. They just sent me another letter, this time with a threat of legal action." Daniel sighed. "It's a typical tactic. But don't let it rattle you. We'll keep gathering evidence, stay on top of everything. Document every interaction, every letter, and especially every visit they make. If they send someone, make sure you record it." Ethan's resolve strengthened. He had already been documenting everything, but now he would be even more meticulous. "I'm on it. I'll keep track of everything." After the call, he spent the next hour walking the boundaries of his property, inspecting the areas where the HOA had tried to make claims, especially the dirt road that ran through his land. He knew that this was the point of contention. The HOA insisted it was a community access road, but his deed clearly stated otherwise. He had the legal right to control it, and he wasn't about to let them take that from him. As he walked, he checked the cameras he had set up, ensuring they were all in place, capturing the perimeter of the property. He was gathering evidence, not just for his own peace of mind, but for the eventual battle he knew was coming. His hands rested on the survey markers at the edge of the road, feeling the weight of the situation. That afternoon, as Ethan was working on his garden, preparing the soil for the fall crops, he heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. He looked up to see a familiar white Mercedes SUV rolling down the dirt road again, this time with a small van behind it. Victoria's SUV came to a stop, and out stepped Victoria Harrington and Robert Winters, followed by a man wearing a bright yellow vest, someone Ethan immediately recognized as a surveyor. Victoria gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Good afternoon, Ethan. We're just here to have a survey done, as part of our final review of your property lines. We need to make sure everything is up to code." Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew what this was. They were trying to gain access to the land under the guise of verifying property boundaries, but it was clear to him now that this was just another power move. "Survey?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I already know where the property lines are. The legal documents are clear." Victoria's smile remained fixed as she waved a hand dismissively. "It's just a formality. We'll be quick." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just about checking boundaries, they were trying to gather more information to use against him. He wasn't going to let them walk all over him. "I'll be recording the entire interaction," Ethan said, pulling his phone from his pocket. He switched it to video mode and held it steady as he began filming. "I'd prefer if we kept this professional." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything as Robert and the surveyor began to unpack their equipment. Ethan stayed where he was, keeping the camera trained on the surveyor as he set up his tools. "You can't just come onto my land without permission," Ethan said firmly. "This is my property. You have no right to be here unless you have something in writing that says otherwise." The surveyor paused, glancing nervously at Victoria, who gave a tight nod. "We have the HOA's authorization to perform this survey," he said quickly, avoiding Ethan's gaze. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The HOA doesn't own this land. And neither do you. I'll be contacting my lawyer about this." Victoria stepped forward, her expression now cold. "Do what you have to do," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But I'm sure you'll find that our position is quite clear." Ethan didn't flinch. "I'll be in touch with my attorney. This will be documented." As they continued with the survey, Ethan kept his camera rolling, recording every step, every interaction. He had no intention of letting them get away with this. He was ready for whatever came next, and he would make sure the world knew the truth. Ethan sat at his desk, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows over the piles of legal documents stacked neatly before him. The faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the small room, which had now become his command center. His once peaceful retreat had transformed into a war room for what was rapidly becoming a battle he hadn't anticipated. He flipped through the legal paperwork with growing frustration, each document a reminder of how far the HOA was willing to go to push him out. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of letters, threats, and increasingly aggressive tactics from Victoria and the HOA. He had sent his formal responses, citing his rights as a property owner and pointing out their overreach, but the HOA was undeterred. They had already escalated matters by sending a surveyor to his land, and he knew they wouldn't stop there. Victoria's latest move had been to pressure the HOA's legal team into action, pushing for a more aggressive approach. Her words from the last encounter echoed in Ethan's mind, "Do what you have to do, but I'm sure you'll find that our position is quite clear." She had no intention of backing down, and her frustration with Ethan's resistance was starting to show. Ethan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, trying to clear his head. The tension was starting to wear on him, but he wouldn't let them win. He had the law on his side, and he was learning how to use it to his advantage. Daniel Kelly, his lawyer, had been a constant source of guidance, but even with his support, Ethan had to be strategic. Every word he sent in his responses needed to be carefully chosen. Legal documentation was his best weapon now. It was time to turn the tables on the HOA. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Olivia. "Watch out. Victoria's pushing hard. She's using every tool at her disposal now. You need to stay ahead of this." Ethan smiled at her text. Olivia had become a trusted ally in all of this, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. He had been hoping for advice from her, and once again, she delivered. The HOA wasn't playing fair, but neither would he. He was done being passive. This wasn't just about his property anymore. This was about standing up to the kind of power Victoria had been wielding for far too long. He glanced at the stack of papers again, the weight of the situation hitting him once more. But he was done being overwhelmed. He began typing up his formal response to the HOA's latest letter. With every word, he gained confidence. He wasn't just fighting for his land. He was fighting for his right to live freely, without being bullied by someone like Victoria. As he typed, the door to his office creaked open. Daniel stood there, holding a thick envelope in his hand. "I've got some news," he said, walking in and setting the envelope on the desk. "This is the HOA's cease and desist order. They're claiming you're obstructing their efforts to maintain the community's access to the water pump station." Ethan stared at the envelope, his stomach dropping. He knew this was coming, but seeing it in black and white made it feel all too real. Victoria and Robert had escalated the situation further, and now they were going after his land under the guise of maintaining the community's access to a utility. Ethan had read about the water pump station, the one Victoria had been so insistent on referencing. He had assumed that it was part of the HOA's excuse to gain more control over his property, but this was the first time they were making a legal claim about it. "Let me guess," Ethan said, his voice tight with anger. "They're claiming I'm obstructing the easement for the water station, right?" Daniel nodded, clearly not surprised. "That's their argument. They're saying you're blocking access to it, even though you've been more than reasonable in allowing access when needed." Ethan leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the desk as he processed the situation. He had already done his research on the easement. He knew the water station was a legitimate utility, but what he also knew was that the HOA had no legal claim to it. They had fabricated this claim, hoping to intimidate him into compliance. And he wasn't going to let them get away with it. "I'm not blocking access," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I've been allowing legitimate maintenance access, and I've even set up a system to make sure they can get in when needed. This is just another way for them to try to force me out." Daniel smiled grimly. "Exactly. We'll make sure they can't get away with this. We'll fight it, but we need to be ready. I've already got some ideas for how to approach this legally." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The HOA was trying to control him through intimidation and false claims, but he wasn't backing down. He would use their tactics against them. The legal battle was just beginning, and he was prepared for the long fight ahead. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork and strategy sessions with Daniel. Ethan meticulously reviewed every document, every letter, and every communication from the HOA, making sure he had a record of everything. He knew that every detail mattered, and he wasn't going to let anything slip through the cracks. As he sat in his office late one night, typing up his response to the HOA's cease and desist order, the weight of the situation finally hit him. This wasn't just a fight for his land. It was a fight for his right to live freely, to protect his property from overreach. He sent the letter off to Daniel for review, then sat back in his chair, staring at the wall. This was only the beginning, but Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. He wasn't just the victim in this story anymore. He was the one calling the shots. Ethan walked slowly to the back corner of his property, the area he had never paid much attention to before. He had spent most of his days working near the house and the land that bordered Oakwood Estates, but today something was different. The nagging feeling that the HOA was hiding something was growing, and he couldn't shake the thought that there was more to their claims than they were letting on. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. The rustling of leaves in the wind seemed louder now, the sound almost whispering a warning. Ethan's boots crunched on the dry grass as he reached the farthest edge of his property, where the surveyors had previously measured, and where Victoria had insisted the HOA had a right-of-way. He had seen the land several times before, but today, with everything he had learned, it felt different. This was the part of the property he hadn't explored much. He'd been busy with other tasks, setting up his farm, building his home, but now, walking out here, his mind was on edge. Something didn't sit right about how the HOA had been pushing their claims. It was then that he noticed it, something buried behind a thicket of overgrown bushes. There, half hidden in the fading light, stood a small, nondescript building. It looked like a utility station of some kind, unmarked and barely visible from the road. Ethan approached it cautiously, pushing the underbrush aside. The door was locked, but it had a small window that gave him a glimpse inside. There was a pump, pipes, and the faint markings of the Oakwood Water District. His heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what this was, the water pump station the HOA had mentioned. This was the infrastructure they had used to claim a right of access to the road that ran through his property. But there was something more important about this pump station that he hadn't realized before. His mind raced as he recalled all the documents he had reviewed, the letters from the HOA, and the comments made by Victoria. He pulled out his phone and searched through his notes, quickly flipping through the legal documents and maps he had on hand. The realization hit him like a freight train. There it was, in black and white, a utility easement that gave the Oakwood Water District the right to access the pump station, but not the HOA. The HOA had never been granted any legal right to the road, and they certainly didn't have any claim over the utility easement. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stood there in the growing twilight, staring at the hidden pump station. This was the leverage he needed. He had been documenting every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every threat, and now he had the evidence to turn the tide. He wasn't going to let them manipulate him any longer. He quickly called Daniel. The lawyer answered on the second ring. "Ethan, what's up?" "I think I found something," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel his excitement bubbling up. "There's a water pump station on my property, hidden, but it's there. And I've got the easement paperwork that proves the HOA has no legal claim to the road or the station." Daniel was silent for a moment. "You're sure?" "I'm positive," Ethan replied. "I've got the documents right here. The water district has the easement, but the HOA isn't even mentioned. They've been lying about this the whole time." Daniel let out a breath. "This is huge, Ethan. If they've been misrepresenting this easement, that changes everything. We've got them cornered now. You need to get that documented and send them a formal notice." Ethan nodded, a surge of confidence flowing through him. "I'm on it. I'll send them the letter. And this time, it'll be clear that I'm not backing down." After the call, Ethan stood for a few more moments, taking in the significance of what he had just uncovered. This wasn't just about fighting back against the HOA's bullying anymore. This was about exposing their lies, about taking control of his own property, and about making sure they couldn't manipulate the system any longer. He spent the next few hours drafting a formal letter to the HOA, outlining his findings and threatening to expose their false claims. His tone was calm, measured, but firm. He would not allow them to get away with this. This was no longer just a matter of legal technicalities, it was about standing up for his rights, for the rights of any other homeowner who had ever been pushed around by an overreaching HOA. The next morning, Ethan sealed the letter, added the appropriate legal documents, and mailed it off, his heart pounding as he imagined Victoria's reaction when she received it. This was it, this was the turning point. He sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over him. For the first time since this battle had begun, he felt as though he had the upper hand. The tables had turned. Ethan sat in the back of the Oakwood Estates Community Center, his palms sweating as he surveyed the room. The atmosphere was charged, thick with tension. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. All around him, the residents of Oakwood Estates filled the seats, murmuring amongst themselves. Victoria sat at the front with the other members of the HOA board, her posture as rigid as ever, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk ready to swoop in on its prey. Ethan had never been in a room this tense, and it was only about to get worse. This was it, the showdown. Today, the entire community would decide who they stood behind, Ethan, the quiet man trying to defend his rights, or Victoria, the powerful HOA president who had been pushing her agenda for far too long. The community center buzzed with whispers and gossip as the meeting began. Victoria stood, smooth and confident, like she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She opened the meeting with her usual warm smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying throughout the room. "Thank you for joining us today. As you all know, we're here to discuss the issue of the road access and the property boundaries concerning Mr. Reynolds' land." Ethan's jaw tightened as he listened to her, the sound of her voice grating on his nerves. She had been the one to stir up the conflict in the first place. And now, as she stood before the crowd, she was trying to make herself look like the victim. He had been waiting for this moment, and he was ready to bring the truth to light. Victoria continued, "As the board has stated before, this road has been considered part of Oakwood Estates for decades. The community's rights to access the pump station and maintain this road are non-negotiable." Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. He could feel the weight of every person's gaze, but he wasn't backing down. "I'm sorry, but that's simply not true," Ethan said, his voice steady. "This road is my property. I've proven this with the legal documents. The easement for the water pump station belongs to the Oakwood Water District, not the HOA. The HOA has no legal claim to this road." He pulled out the stack of documents he had meticulously compiled over the past few weeks. The room watched as he laid them on the table, one by one: deeds, easement agreements, legal filings. He even included the formal letter from his attorney, Daniel, which had laid out the legal flaws in the HOA's claims. "Victoria and the HOA have been manipulating the facts and lying to this community," Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "This is about more than just road access. This is about standing up to people who think they can control others without consequences. And today, I'm giving you the truth. The choice is yours." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent now, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning in the background. Ethan could see some of the residents looking at each other, exchanging glances. There was a shift in the room, a crack in Victoria's carefully constructed facade. Victoria's smile faltered, and she stood up to address the crowd, trying to regain control. "Ethan, this isn't about facts or documents. This is about community standards, about maintaining property values for everyone. We have always had access to this road, and if we let him get away with this, it sets a dangerous precedent for the entire neighborhood." But before she could continue, a voice from the back interrupted her. "I don't understand," a man said, raising his hand. "If the road belongs to Mr. Reynolds, why are we all just hearing about this now? Why wasn't this addressed earlier?" Another resident spoke up. "That's right. And why hasn't the HOA made all of this clear to the community before? Seems like we've been kept in the dark about a lot of things." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the mood in the room began to shift. It was no longer just a one-on-one confrontation between him and Victoria. The community was starting to question her. Victoria's face tightened with frustration, but she pushed on, trying to keep control. "This is a misunderstanding, a legal technicality," she said, her voice rising. "We need to protect this community. I'm asking you all to vote for the HOA's continued jurisdiction over this property." But the damage was done. The residents weren't buying it anymore. One by one, people started speaking up, voicing their concerns. Ethan saw Robert, the HOA vice president, standing beside Victoria, his arms crossed, but he could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. Robert had always been the enforcer, but now, even he seemed to be questioning Victoria's leadership. As the debate grew louder, Ethan saw an opening. He stood up again, his voice calm but firm. "Victoria," he said, addressing her directly, "the truth is, you've been using the HOA as a tool for your own benefit. You've manipulated the system to serve your interests, and now the community is seeing through it." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Ethan," she spat. "I will not let you destroy everything I've worked for. If you think I'm going to sit here and let you dictate the future of Oakwood Estates, you're wrong." The room was dead silent now, the tension palpable. Ethan knew what was coming next. Robert shifted uncomfortably beside Victoria, and it was clear that even he was starting to have second thoughts. Finally, the moment Ethan had been waiting for arrived. The HOA board stood up to make their decision. The room held its breath as the vote was cast. The result was clear. Victoria was out. But Victoria wasn't ready to admit defeat. Her face flushed with anger as she turned toward the crowd, her eyes blazing. "You may have won this vote, but you haven't heard the last of me," she said, her voice low but full of venom. "I will take this to court. You haven't seen the last of me." Ethan stood tall as Victoria stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. The room was still. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of the fight beginning to lift. The morning sun rose over Ethan's ranch, casting a warm glow across the land. The soft breeze carried the scent of fresh earth, and the sound of birds singing filled the air. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ethan could take a breath without the constant tension in his chest. The long battle with the HOA had ended, and though there was still more to come, it felt like the weight had been lifted. Ethan stood on the porch of his ranch house, his gaze sweeping over the property that had become so much more than just a dream. The garden was flourishing, the chicken coop was bustling with life, and the new barn he had built stood proudly in the distance. It had been hard work, but every effort had been worth it. The place was exactly what he had envisioned when he first moved here. Beside him, Olivia stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the scene. She smiled, her eyes soft with pride. "Look at this place," she said, her voice full of awe. "It's hard to believe how much has changed, isn't it?" Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. "Yeah. When I first got here, it was just me and a piece of land. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I guess I've got something worth fighting for now." They stood there for a moment, both lost in their thoughts, taking in the peaceful scene. The war with the HOA was over, and now the real work could begin. Ethan knew that things had changed for good, not just for him, but for the entire community. "I still can't believe they tried to take the road," Olivia said, breaking the silence. "I mean, to try and push you out like that." Ethan shook his head, his expression hardening. Victoria and the others were too focused on their own interests. They didn't care about the people they were affecting. They thought they could push me around because they had the power. But power doesn't last when it's built on lies. "I'm glad you didn't back down," Olivia said, her tone sincere. "You've changed everything for us. Oakwood Estates is never going to be the same." Ethan smiled, though it was a smile tinged with weariness. "It's not just me. The community came together. They saw what was happening, and they stood by me. It's that unity that made the difference." As they talked, the morning quiet was interrupted by the hum of an engine approaching. Ethan turned to see Robert Winters driving up the dirt road in his truck. The once stern vice president of the HOA had changed in recent weeks, his relationship with Ethan now much more civil. Robert had supported the decision to remove Victoria, and while he had once been loyal to her, he had come to realize that her leadership had been nothing but a toxic force in the community. Robert stepped out of his truck and approached with a purposeful stride. He waved at Ethan and Olivia, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Morning," he greeted them. "Morning," Ethan replied, glancing at Olivia. "What's going on, Robert?" "I've got something for you," Robert said, handing Ethan a piece of paper. "It's from the HOA's new leadership. They want to make sure everything's in order and are offering a settlement for the legal access to the road. They're willing to keep the road under your control, but they want to ensure utility access is maintained." Ethan took the paper, reading through the terms carefully. It was exactly what he had hoped for: control over the road, but with clear stipulations that allowed for legal access for utility maintenance. He had won. "Well," Ethan said, looking up at Robert with a slight smile, "I guess we've got ourselves a deal." Robert's eyes narrowed, but then he nodded, a hint of respect in his expression. "You fought hard for this, Ethan. I've got to hand it to you. You didn't just let them steamroll you." Ethan chuckled, folding the document. "I didn't just fight for myself. I fought for everyone who didn't have a voice. That's what really matters." As Robert walked back to his truck, Olivia stepped closer to Ethan. "It's done," she said softly. "You did it." Ethan nodded, a feeling of peace washing over him. "Yeah, it's done. But there's still work to be done here. This place, it's where I belong now." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The HOA, under new leadership, began to focus on rebuilding the community, focusing on collaboration instead of control. The fence that had divided Ethan's property from Oakwood Estates was removed, and the road that had once been a battleground was now a symbol of Ethan's victory. But not everyone was ready to move on. One afternoon, as Ethan was tending to his vegetable garden, he received a call. He didn't recognize the number, but when he answered, his suspicion was confirmed. It was Victoria's husband. "Ethan," the voice on the other end said, strained with urgency, "I need emergency access to the road. There's a problem with the water supply." Ethan paused for a moment, his hand stilling on the watering can. He could hear the unease in the man's voice, but instead of feeling the weight of frustration he once had, Ethan now felt calm. "Sure," he said, his voice steady, "I'll unlock the gate for you. Just give me a moment." He hung up the phone, then walked over to the gate, the key in his hand. He could feel a quiet sense of power surge within him. He had taken control of this road, and now, he was the one deciding who had access. With a satisfied smile, he unlocked the gate, the metal click of the lock ringing in the still air. The once contentious road had become something different now. It was a symbol of his strength, his ability to stand his ground, and his triumph over corruption. Ethan watched as the truck drove through the gate, then locked it behind him. He stood there for a moment, the weight of the past few months settling over him. He had fought, and he had won. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had been intimidated, pushed aside, and told they didn't have a voice. The road was his now, and he was in control. As the dust settled on Ethan's fight, the morning sun rose over the land he had fought so hard to protect. The community, once divided, began to heal, united in the face of adversity. Ethan knew that the battle had not only changed his life but had restored a sense of justice that the HOA had long tried to undermine. In life, just as in this story, the power of unity and standing firm in what is right cannot be underestimated. When we come together to fight for what is just, even the most powerful forces are brought to their knees. Maybe it's time for all of us to stand up, to remind ourselves that it's never too late to make a difference.